us today. Um, Welcome to our Rethink Retirement webinar. Thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Angela Dennerson, and I'm a Senior Business Development Officer at the Los Angeles Police Federal Credit Union. If you're joining us tonight because you want to know more on how you can retire and what retirement options are out there, then you're in the right spot. Our goal tonight is to give you an overview on planning for retirement, what investments you should use, how much is enough, and other factors you need to think about when planning your retirement. Before we get started, I'd like to mention that the session is a live webinar and a recording of the webinar will be sent out shortly after. You will be in listen-only mode, but presenters will have some dedicated time to answer your questions towards the end of the presentation, and we encourage you to ask them along the way by typing into the question box below. If you're on a regular desktop, there's a Q&A section towards the bottom right corner on your screen. If you're on a mobile device, you can click on the 3-button ellipsis on the bottom screen to get to the Q&A. Please type in your questions, and we will get to as many as we can. So I'd like to introduce our speaker today, Chris Ellis. Chris Ellis is a certified financial planner with CUSO Financial Services and has worked as a partner with LAPFCU since 2016. Chris graduated from Pepperdine University with his BA in 1998 and earned his master's degree from Loyola Marymount University in 2003. Prior to becoming a financial advisor, Chris worked for Target Corporation and conducted 401k presentations to employees. This led him to become a licensed registered investment advisor in 2013. And he received his certified financial planner certificate in November of 2021. As a certified financial planner, Chris has expertise in areas of financial planning, taxes, estate planning, insurance, and retirement plans. We are lucky to have him share this expertise this evening at our Rethink Retirement webinar. Thank you so much, Chris. I'm going to turn it to you.
Thank you, Angie. I appreciate that. Welcome, everybody. We're happy to have you this evening. This is a presentation that really is fitting right now with a lot of the current volatilities in the market and just a lot of unanswered questions that you may have. So we're going to go through and kind of talk about retirement in general. We're going to talk about different phases, but I just want to make sure that you guys are well versed on the different ideas that lead to the best kind of practices for you, each of you individually. And so with that, I'm going to pull up my first slide. So I am a certified financial planner. Basically, within the industry of financial services, the certified financial planner is kind of the highest designation that you can earn as a fiduciary. So that means that you're working in the best interest of your clients. Here at LAPFCU, you all recognize the benefits that the credit union provide and offer you. This is just an additional benefit the credit union offers. I work for a company called CUSO Financial Services. CUSO stands for Credit Union Service Organization. Credit Union Service Organization, so it's a nonprofit broker-dealer that supplies financial advisors to different credit unions. As Angela said in the beginning, I've been with the credit union since 2016, really happy to be a part of it. They make me feel as if I'm an employee, and I'm very welcomed with that. Our disclosure, so just basically as a registered investment advisor or registered broker-dealer, the credit union has contracted with CFS Credit CUSO Financial Services to make non-deposit investment products and services available. There is a chance of loss as kind of one of those caveats. So we want to make sure that we disclose that in the beginning of our presentation. All right, with that being said, let's talk about what are the topics we're going to discuss today. So our objectives, I want to make sure that you understand that there's different planning areas or different stages within planning for retirement. The first one is going to be your early career. Then we have kind of those middle years when you're growing your net worth and then getting close to that time of retirement. And usually the biggest question is, can I retire? And even those who are early in retirement, they're focusing on you know, am I going to make it? Right? Those are the biggest questions that people have, and it's scary out there. So we want to help make sure that you understand there's resources available to you here at the credit union that we can provide. What investments should I use? Well, it's going to be specific to each individual, but we'll go over what are some of the ways to stay invested or to put your money into investments. How much is enough? There's distribution stages. There's, when I retire, sequence of returns. What happens if my money starts to go down in value? The S&P 500 is off, 16% on the year. What should I do? Are we going into a recession, a depression? Well, we might not be right now, or if we are, how is that going to affect my retirement or when I can retire? And that's a common question that people have. Inflation. I want to make sure that we discuss inflation, what it means, and what are the ramifications. And then each individual that I'm talking to tonight, you should have your own plan. You should have something in place that says, this is what a financial advisor has helped to organize for me, and I'm going to stick with it because history says that if I stick with my plan, that's going to create the most success. So we're going to talk through a little bit about that, and then what are the next stages or next steps to move forward in creating that plan. All right, so let's begin with talking about the early career. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is create a budget. This is important for somebody in their late teens, early 20s, when you first get a job and you start to have money, and you need to know how much you can spend on a monthly basis based on what the inflows are and what my outflows are. When you get to retirement, it's the same exact thing. This is how much I'm going to have coming in. These are my resources. What can I afford? So creating a budget is something that from 18 years old to 98 years old, you should understand where you are. Something that many of us forget to do. And so we want to make sure that we are basically creating that budget, because within that budget, you're going to have to identify how much can I save. So part of that budget is for expenses. It's for your car payment. It's for your rent when you're early in your career. Now, for many of us in our middle or late career, it's our mortgage payments. It's still car payments. It could be college expenses. It could be all of those different things that you have to put out. But if you're not saving, you have to keep working because you haven't put enough away to be able to retire. So those are some things that we want to make sure that your budget creates a space or a place where you pay yourself. What type of account should I use to save for the future? Well, this is going to be specific to where you work, how much you're making, and what you can save. So let's talk about what are the accounts that we have and how do those accounts need to be set up to set me up for the most success for retirement. Well, the first one is an emergency fund. I have so many people who call me in the credit union and they will say, hey, Chris, I've got $10,000. I've got $15,000 in my savings account. What should I invest it in? I can't give you advice on that. I need to know, is that your emergency fund? Are those the funds that you would use if you need to get tires on the car, if there's a health emergency, if you need to put a new roof on the house? What is your emergency fund set aside? So for many of you, that will be 3 months of your net income, or it could be 6 months of your net income. 3 months is typically designed for somebody or for a couple who is a dual income household. You have two incomes, two adults who are working out in the workforce, creating that savings and that threshold. So if one of you is not able to go back to work, the other person will carry the burden of it, but you at least have enough saved to cover 3 months of your emergency funds. Because you have the additional income coming in from the person who continues to work. If you are a single income earning household, you need to have 6 months of net income set aside. What is net income? Well, that's what you're getting paid on your paychecks. That's what goes into the bank on the direct deposit. So with your 6 months, that's in case you can't go back to work, but you may have mortgage payments, car payments, life insurance payments, whatever payments that are important to you, you can be able to afford those for at least 6 months that gets you back on your feet into a new position or a new job. Now, once we have our emergency funds set aside, the next thing that we're going to do is identify goals. I am a goals-based planner. So I want to know what your goals are for your funds or for retirement, or what are your lofty goals of owning a Lamborghini. Okay, we want to know what those goals are so that we can help identify which type of account or how you're going to save to be able to reach those goals. So early on in life, that could be a car, could be a new home, right? As we get into maybe marriage, families, there might be college costs for your kids that you have to do. And then the one that we're talking about mostly tonight is retirement. How do we set aside or create enough savings for our retirement? On the side here, we have account types, checking, savings, IRA. I'm going to skip to the next slide because we go into detail on each of those different accounts. So let's talk about checking and savings. So checking and savings is your liquid account that's used for your short-term goals. This could be also a money market account. Money market will at least give you a little higher interest rate while it's sitting there at the credit union, as opposed to the checking and savings accounts that might have a little bit less. The performance checking, if you haven't looked into that, you should. That provides a little bit higher interest rate for money that is just sitting in your checking account. I'm going to refer you to the credit union to answer those questions. But checking and savings are very important. That's your emergency fund, going back to the 3 or 6 months that you need to have set aside. The next thing, typically what I tell folks is your number one place that you're going to save for retirement is going to be within your employer retirement plan. If you work for the city, you work for the county, that could be a 457. A 457 plan means you work for a government entity, government agency. A 401k means you work for a for-profit organization. A 403b is nonprofit. That could be nursing, could be schools, it could be something in the nonprofit sector. And then you have IRAs. IRAs are for people who don't have an employer-sponsored plan, and you still can get a tax deduction. So these are typically pre-tax contributions. So that means money goes into that account before the taxes get it. And then when you take that out later in retirement or when you need it for additional expenses, then it's going to get taxed then. I typically recommend pre-tax options for those who are in higher tax brackets. We'll talk about taxes a little bit later in this presentation, but many of these plans, these employer-sponsored plans, also offer Roth options, okay? A Roth 457, a Roth 401k, a Roth IRA. That means that you're paid your taxes today, and you will get to collect all of the gains for that investment tax-free down the road. So when we're dealing with the taxes, right, it's typically going to be what is going to be the best benefit for me long term. One typical conversation I have with members of the credit union when they start to tell me that they're contributing to the Roth within their 457, they're contributing to the Roth within their 401k, my first question is, where do you plan on living in retirement? And many of them say, I'm going to move out of state, Nevada, Arizona, Tennessee, Texas, Idaho, typical states that have more tax-friendly state taxes or state tax plans. Well, when I say that to them, if you're contributing to the Roth today, you're giving the state of California part of that tax if you move out of state and you took it out of your retirement plan later and you pay taxes within that state, you might not owe any state taxes. You would only owe the federal government. So there's just a different conversation, right, about what are these. If you plan on staying in California, taxes are high. And so it might be beneficial to contribute to the Roth IRA. I always say you got to pay Uncle Sam, and right now we got to pay Uncle Gavin our taxes. And sad to say, maybe we might see increased taxes just based on some of the situations that are going on. But again, those are individual conversations that we have. We set that up, make sure that you have the answers that you need. For those of you who are self-employed, or maybe you worked for a government agency or a for-profit organization, and now you're retired or you moved into the private sector and you're working for yourself. You can set up your own, what we call a SEP plan, self-employment plan. You can set up a solo 401k, a simple IRA. There are other ways that you can get money to be taken off of your taxes that could be a good option for you, depending on what your tax situation looks like right now. And then lastly, we'll talk about life insurance, okay? Typically with life insurance, the only way you're going to have a cash accumulation is with a permanent life policy. That could be a whole life or a universal life policy. Term life typically is less expensive, and it's typically something that you can get a higher death benefit. It's built for protection. It might be for mortgage protection. It might be for the protection of your kids to go to college. But term policies are typically what I recommend just because it's more affordable, and permanent policies can get very expensive, and we just want to make sure that that fit is correct. But that's typically, if you're looking at it as an account to put money away, that's typically one of the last things that we recommend, because you've fulfilled all of the other duties, right? Or not duties, you fulfilled all the other buckets of savings. And then there are annuities out there. Annuities are a tax deferred product. Those are typically for folks who don't get into their 50, over the age of 50. They're more designed for a CD alternative. They can be a pension alternative as well. You just need to make sure you understand what that looks like. They can be great. There's a lot of financial advisors out there who don't recommend annuities. You need to know what it is to make sure that you make that decision for yourself. All right, we're going to go on to the next slide. Hopefully I'm not going through this too quickly, but there's so much to cover, and I just want to make sure we get through it all. All right, so now we get to the point of building net worth. So we talked about the early stages. What type of account should I be setting up? How much should I be putting away is kind of early on. We need to know that as well, but that's that budgeting. But once we start getting into, we're earning more, we're rising up the ranks within our company or within the government, within the law enforcement, we start to make more money. Now we have dual incomes, because we're married, we have two people who are putting money aside. We purchase a home, the home starts to build equity. This is net worth. I learned on early, before I even became a financial advisor, that your typical wealth is built in your 40s and 50s. That's typically when you've established yourself, you're in a career, and you're making, those income levels that allow you to start saving more, that allow you to purchase a home, that allow you to build that equity. And maybe depending on your income levels, you can start to purchase rental properties or, diverse your portfolio into other investments. But what I want to talk about right now is the identifying of which type of retirement account. We just talked about that. And then if we don't know how much we're spending, if we don't know how much we need today with our outflows because we haven't created that budget, then we don't know what we're going to need later on, okay? Because we don't know how much we're actually spending. And then the second thing is, if we don't know how much we're spending, we don't know how much we can save, right? We don't know how much we can set aside because we might not have created that number. And I know some people are great at this. Every pay period or every paycheck, they have a set amount of money that goes into their savings account. They're already contributing to their retirement plan. They're putting money in their savings account. They're building those things. And they might even have, $50, $100 going into an investment outside of, outside the credit union, outside of their investments. That typically helps to create additional wealth down the road. Now, one of the numbers that people have talked about, and this always gets debated, but is 10% of your income enough to be set aside for retirement? So, I'm not going to go into a history lesson, but, Social Security was to supplement your retirement accounts. A lot of people use that as their retirement, and then they supplement their Social Security with their retirement plans. It was built to be the other way around, but with 401ks, with pensions for many organizations or many companies going away, 401ks, 457s, this has become the primary way for people to put money away. 10%, if each spouse is putting away 10%, now you have 20% of the dual income going towards retirement. That's a better number than just 10%. 15% is probably more realistic of what people will need depending on when they start. If you started in your early career and you started with 10 or 15% when you first start your job in your early 20s, then you probably have enough time with compounding interest. If you're going to start later in 40s and 50s to put 10% away to supplement your retirement income of Social Security, I don't know if you're going to have enough. This number is extremely important to talk through to see if you're going to have enough money to achieve those retirement goals, going back to that slide before that I just discussed. So, and I'm going to keep reiterating this, each of you out there is going to have a different plan in place. You're going to be in different stages. So it's not a cookie cutter. I'm not going to say this is perfect for each one of you. We have to talk and make sure that we set up a plan that's going to help you achieve your goals. And then lastly, it goes back to the budget. And you'd be surprised. I talk with retirees who may not have ever worked with a financial advisor. Their money's still sitting in their 457 deferred comp plan. Their money might be with their employer that they had. And they're 1 or 2 years into retirement and they don't even know how much they're spending monthly because they never created that budget. Or they have an idea, they know what's going on, but it's really important to have some numbers if this is something that you're looking to accomplish in the near term. Okay, many of you out there, you're on this call because you're getting close to that point where you want to retire, where you want to have these answers. Well, this is where we start, making sure we understand where your expenses are so that we know it's not going to change much. In retirement, you're probably going to be spending more because you're going to have more time available to you. For those of you who may have grandkids and you're going to go want to spend time with grandkids or take over the responsible duties of, helping them grow as your kids and your in-laws are working, you're going to be spending money on those things and you're going to want to contribute. And all of those things add cost that put burden on your budget. So it's just making sure that we understand where are the funds that you have now going to be spent. All right, moving forward. All right. Now, as we start talking about retirement, and I kept saying you got to put money away, putting money into 457, putting money away into your 401k. Well, what do I invest it in, right? How do I put that money into an investment that's going to grow and make me feel comfortable that during times of volatility like right now, that I'm not going to panic and freak out? And don't worry, we're all panicking and freaking out because we don't have the answers. We don't know what's going to happen. We have history that has given us examples that we can, grow from and learn from to figure out what the future may hold. But typically what we do is we say, all right, these are the different factors. Okay, if inflation is our number one factor, and we have to focus on what is the Federal Reserve doing. And I'm going to go into a deep dive into Federal Reserve in a second, but these are the different factors that are challenging. And I will tell you that inflation is the number one factor that is impacting the stock market. People will talk about political events, Russia, China. Are we going to go and defend Taiwan if China invades Taiwan? Those are huge political events that are going on, but inflation is still number one that hits our pocketbooks. And again, we'll go into it. But political events are factors that we have to take into consideration. I graduated from Pepperdine University. I got my bachelor's degree in political science. I'm fascinated with how politics affect the stock market. I'm fascinated with politics in general, and it scares the heck out of me right now. And it has nothing to do with what side of the aisle you're on. What it has to do with is how is the administration, how is Congress going to change policies to affect what happens to us in our pocketbooks? And that's fiscal policy. fiscal policy is only decided by Congress and the administration. Okay, those are the factors that if they're going to raise taxes for corporations, that's going to hurt the stock market. If they raise taxes for us, we know that hurts us. Okay, are they going to keep these tax structures? Midterm elections are coming. Midterm elections are going to have a huge influence on the stock market. And I'm not going to go into much more of a deep dive on that. Everybody has their own political views and what's right, what's wrong. What I will say is we do need politicians that can work together and create, policy that will help everybody, that helps the greater good. And until we get that, there's a lack of faith. There's a lack of confidence within Washington, D.C. right now. And I'm not spewing that because that's what I feel. That's not what I'm hearing from members coming into the branches. We're seeing the polls. We're seeing that people have a lack of faith across the country within their political leaders. And we're probably going to see some changes during the midterm elections. And the stock market has typically and historically performed well during midterm election years. If you look at the last 36 midterm election years, 32 have been positive. So we're talking about 72 years of data, and over 60 years have been positive. That's a good sign that maybe we're going to be okay. Okay, fingers crossed. All right. So the one thing that I will talk about with navigating stormy seas, cash has barely kept pace with inflation. So if we look at inflation over the last 36 years, it's up 210%. That's not including numbers from 2022. Well, we know inflation is probably somewhere between 8.5%. So even if you round this up to 220, 230% is what inflation is up over the last 36 years. The Dow Jones is up 1,290% during that same time frame, and the S&P 500 is up 1,600%. So what we know is the last 90 years, stocks and the stock market have outperformed inflation. Okay, so that's the only asset, right? Stocks, commodities, those are the two assets that have outperformed inflation. So staying invested during inflationary periods, the stock market tends to come back and grow those. Okay, I'm not saying that that's the right thing for you to do. We have to have a personal conversation about that and make sure that's the right fit. But staying invested during periods of time of inflation, during volatility, tend to reward the person who stays invested. And we continue that. I'm going to skip ahead real second to this slide. I'm going to go back to the Federal Reserve. So investment return. So I said you're rewarded for staying invested, for holding your course. If you stayed fully invested from January 1st to 2002, so 2002, 2003 were really bad years in the stock market. That's when the internet, began in the 90s. Thankfully, Al Gore created the internet for us to be able to have this type of webinar today. But we saw this boom burst, right, in the early 2000s. 2007, we had the housing crisis. 2008 was a disastrous year in the stock market, okay? But you stayed the course. If you stayed invested, 2015, 2018, we had down years in the market. 2020 with COVID. If you stayed fully invested over that time period, you would have averaged a 9% return on your portfolio year in, year out if you stayed invested. If you just missed 10 days of the market, only 10, if you just missed 10, but they were the 10 best days of the market, your portfolio would almost be cut in half. You'd be at 5.33% return over that same period of time. If you missed 30 of the best days, if you took a month off and said, hey, I'm not going to participate in the market, I'm not going to be there when the market has a 1,000-point, reversal upward. I'm not going to be there when it grows 2,000, points over the course of 3 or 4 days during a week. You would barely be making any money, and you wouldn't even be keeping up with inflation. So staying the course tends to reward the person who does it. I feel like I'm in a crypto.com commercial. by the victor stays the course or whatever. Matt, why can't I think of that guy's name? You guys know what I'm talking about. But you want to make sure that you're taking calculated risk with what you're comfortable with, but staying in a portfolio that makes sense for you. Now we're going to talk about the Federal Reserve. Okay, let's talk Matt Damon. That's the guy's name. I knew it'd come to me. All right. So the Federal Reserve. All right. The Federal Reserve is appointed by the President of the United States as chairman. We have Chairman Powell, who's been just reconfirmed for a second term. Okay. So with Powell being in the position of the chairman of the Federal Reserve is represented by many different economists that have offices throughout the United States. They have one job, which is to dictate the cash flow of the federal government. Okay, and when I say cash flow, they're either buying bonds. Okay, they've been buying bonds as part of their fiscal, decision making. To if they buy it, they're putting money back into the government, and they're allowing money to be spent. Okay, this is what we call easing. When they're selling these off and they're bringing money back into the government, they're tightening up their purse strings. They're bringing money back in. Okay, that's a tightening of the fiscal conditions within the United States. The other thing that the Federal Reserve does, which is the focal point of what we're hearing in the news today, is they raise rates. And it's like, oh, they impact the mortgage rate at the credit union? Sort of. It's a domino effect. The Federal Reserve will raise the overnight lending rate that financial institutions borrow from each other. The federal government has said that financial institutions have to hold a lot of cash on hand so that we don't have another housing crisis like we did in 2007. So you have to have enough cash reserve that's a percentage of all of the cash that's represented by the deposits. So the Federal Reserve says, we're going to dictate what the overnight lending rate is. Well, that was closer to about 2.5, 2.75 pre-COVID in 2020. Once COVID hit, they dropped it down to 0%. Okay. And now they're trying to increase that rate, and they're trying to do it without impacting the market. Too late. The market's been impacted. Okay. So the Federal Reserve can either raise rates or lower rates. Now, I put in here a picture of a teeter-totter, a seesaw. Okay. And what I want you to think about is if you have a teeter-totter. So let's say on this side over here, this is the Federal Reserve, and over on this side, this is a bond portfolio, right? So the bond portfolio, when the Federal Reserve had to lower interest rates in 2020, if you were in a conservative portfolio, you made about 9% on your portfolio because the Federal Reserve dropped interest rates, dropping them down to 0. Your bonds that had 2.5%, 3%, maybe 4 or 5% interest rates, coupon rates, that grew in value. Okay. So if you were conservative, you were loving it in 2020, you made 10% on your money. Well, now what they're doing to try and correct that is they're saying we've got to raise rates. So if they raise rates and you're in a conservative portfolio, what's happening to your portfolio today? You lost all 10%. It's down 9.5%. That's the Barclays aggregate, AGG. If you just look at the Barclays aggregate, that is the depiction of what the U.S. Grade bonds are trading at, and it's down 9.5%. I just looked at it this morning. So what do? We have interest rates going up. Your bond portfolio, your conservative portfolio, you thought you were safe. You just lost 9.5%. Stock market's down anywhere from 14 to 18%. We went to a bear market. We can talk about that in a second. You're down 18 or 20%. What do? What's the safe haven? Oh, I'll go to cash. Okay, we just had a slide a little while ago that says cash doesn't even keep up with inflation. So what do? Okay, that's the toughest decision that I'm having with clients right now, or not decision, just conversation about where do we go? How do we weather this storm? And am I in the right portfolio that's going to help to recover that and make sure that I don't lose, 30% of my money and it doesn't come back. Okay. This is a big deal. So now what I'm going to tell you is the key to our teeter-totter with the Federal Reserve raising rates, this slows inflation. If rates go up, people will stop borrowing money. Now, everyone wants to blame, or I don't want to say everyone. I got to be careful. I'm a parent and I say that to my kid, and I always have to retreat and say, not everyone, just a select few. But there's a lot of people out there who want to blame the Biden administration for the many different stimulus checks that went out. That is a big factor. When you pump money into the economy and everybody has money, we have a supply chain issue. Okay, so let's just talk about 2019. In 2019, you could get 10 apples for $10, probably less, but let's just keep it easy math. You had plenty of apples. They were $1 each. $10 gets you 10 apples. Well, 2021, late 2021, it starts to creep up because we have supply chain issues. It's harder to get apples. So now, in order for you to get 10 apples, it's going to cost you 13 bucks. It's gone up $1.30 per apple instead of $1, right? Well, if I've got, I'm losing 30 cents per apple, that's $3. Well, I only have $10. Remember, we talked about our budget. We can only afford $10 of apples. Well, now I don't get 10 apples anymore, right? I got to cut down to, 7 apples in order to fit my budget. Okay. Now, supply chain supply chain gets impacted even more, and there's so many people who have money to buy the same 10 apples out there. Now apples cost $2. Okay. So within a 10 to 12 month period of time, we went from being 10 apples for 10 bucks to 10 apples for $20. Now, that's just an example. That's not the actual cost of what an apple is at the grocery store, but I think you can get the idea of how inflation impacts us. Now, if the Federal Reserve starts to raise rates, okay, then people will start to spend less money, or I should say, will start to borrow less. I'm going to go back to the Biden administration. People are upset about the cash flow. The other thing that happened that people forget about is because cash was cheap to borrow. You could get your mortgage, a 30-year mortgage rate, you could refinance at 2.5%, 2.75. Okay, I got locked in at 2.75. Pretty pumped about that. And I took out money to do additional, improvements on the home. Okay, I borrowed. I caused part of that additional cash flow. I have more money to spend. Many of you out there have more money to spend. So it's not just the Biden administration giving out checks. It's also that we could borrow money for cheap. So we just have a lot more cash in the availability, and then we have less goods because of COVID, because of supply chain issues, because of all of the things you're hearing in the news. Federal Reserve is probably late to the game to raise rates to stop people from borrowing. Probably should happen a little bit sooner. Biden administration was trying to push through another stimulus, another infrastructure bill, build back better, I think is what it was called. So those are things that probably would have increased inflation much more quickly. Federal Reserve steps in, they start raising rates. Okay, people are concerned about home values. Is home values going to go out? If you're holding cash right now and you're saying, hey, I'm going to wait until the housing, prices go way down, probably not going to go down. They're just not going to increase at 19% or 28% or whatever it is that we saw in LA County, for 2021. It's not going to increase at those rates. It's going to stay on level. Okay, that's what we're probably going to see. It's still going to hurt people who don't have enough money, especially here in Southern California. It's massive. For those of you who are in other states who are watching this right now, you probably are seeing different types of pressures within your communities, but that's basically what's happening. The Federal Reserve has a very important decision ahead of them, and if they screw it up, it will continue to impact the stock market. It will continue to impact people's abilities to, either borrow or borrow too much, and then we're increasing inflation. I don't envy their job. I think that they are looking at all factors and making sure. What I'll tell you is on June 10th of next month, that's when we're going to see the inflation number. So as a financial advisor or financial planner, we're all looking at that date because that's when the inflation numbers are going to be shared. And if inflation comes in under 8.3%, so it was at 8.3 for the month of April. If inflation comes in at under 8.3%, then the stock market will feel a little less pressure because we will know inflation peaked in March at 8.5. Okay, it went to 8.5 in March, 8.3 in April. They were hoping it would drop lower. It didn't. Okay, but now if it goes under that, it goes down into the sevens, then people will feel comfortable that the Federal Reserve actions are working. If it comes in the 8, stays at 8.3 or goes above that, we're going to have serious issues. June 14th and 15th is when the Federal Reserve will actually meet and they will decide what interest rate hike they're going to do. They've already said they're committed to a 0.5% interest rate hike in June, a 0.5% interest rate hike in July, and they came out today and said they're continuing to look at adding additional rate hikes throughout the year. So we're talking about at the beginning of this year, you could borrow money for your mortgage, right? Refinance your mortgage at 3%. 3.3 is typically the average that we saw early January. And we're at 5.25, moving to 5.5. If we increase rates another, 1.5% by the Federal Reserve, that's the domino. Remember, they're only increasing their overnight rate, but that domino falls and everything else gets more expensive. If everything else gets more expensive, it's harder to borrow money. It's going to Target or Walmart, the cost of goods are more expensive. We're going to buy less. That will eventually lead to less jobs. That will eventually lead to companies saying, well, they're buying less. We don't need as many people in the stores working. We're going to lay off. Well, if you lay off people, in the stores and people are buying less, well, you're going to lay off in distribution. And there's just a domino. So that's why inflation, I keep talking about, is the number one factor that people are worried about today. If you're getting close to retirement or you're in retirement, you have a lot of time on your hands that you're looking at these things. You just need to have somebody help you through the process to make sure, one, you're educated to make the best financial decision for yourself. I tell people my job is not to manage your money. I'm a planner. I help create a plan to put you in position to be successful so you can make the financial decisions you need. But without a plan in place, you don't know what questions to ask. You don't know how to set these things up. But you're also hearing news, right? You're hearing information, and it's scary, okay? And that's because with the media, fear sells, right? We click on stuff that makes us, a little bit anxious because we need to know that information, how it's going to affect our retirement. So having somebody who's, more focused on what you need can really help in that situation. All right. Hopefully I've answered some questions with the Federal Reserve, and we are getting questions that are coming in the question and answer. We will get to those at the end of our presentation here. We talked about investment returns. Timing. Okay, the timing of when you retire, and this really plays a role today, sequence of returns risk. Okay, so the sequence of return basically says that what if I retire and I'm investing that money into a portfolio, but I also need money to take out. I got to take money to live, right? I've got to supplement my retirement income through my nest egg, through my portfolio, okay? Well, in this scenario, we have a $500,000 retirement account where somebody is withdrawing 5% of, their portfolio value to keep up with inflation, to keep up with everything else that's going on. It's invested in a portfolio of 60% stocks, 30% bonds, and 10% cash. And then what are the results over a 10-year time frame? Well, if you retired in 1990, you retire, you have $500,000, you start taking money out along the way. In 2000, you would have $930,000 in your portfolio. The 90s were a great year. Again, it goes back to Al Gore. We really need to send him a thank you note. But the internet created so many opportunities within the stock market to create wealth that drove up value for invested portfolios. So you actually had almost double the amount of money along the way, and you took out 25 grand per year because that's 5% of 500,000. Well, if you retired in 2000, because the early 2000s were sitting in the tech bubble burst, and then you had a few years in the middle of that, money started to be made back again in the portfolios. Then you get to a point where 2008, you lose 38% of your portfolio in year end, and you end up overspending. You don't have enough money. You would be in the red by $236,000 just because of the timing of the market. If you retired in 2010 and 2020, you would have 824,000 in your portfolio. Okay, so people are like, well, what do I do? What if 2022 is the beginning of a bad 10-year run and I'm going to run out of money within my portfolio? Okay, well, the key is if you look at this portfolio, it's a set it and forget it model. This is what we call a passive portfolio. 60% stocks, and we're just going to say 40% bonds, a 60-40 portfolio. The 60% is in the S&P 500. That's passive. It just sits there. And then you have the aggregate. The bonds went down 9.5% at the beginning of the year. The stocks are down. You're down 14% on your portfolio. What do? Okay. Well, this is the difference between somebody in retirement doesn't have enough time to recover their portfolio if we see massive losses. Time is for people in their early careers, building their net worth. Those who are about to retire or in retirement, you probably need something that's more tactical. You need something that has built-in stop loss measurement, something that you have a portfolio manager. And I'm not talking about me as a portfolio manager. You have investments that are, have a calculated strategy that makes sense for what you need, and will make adjustments along the way. But for those of you who have time, the key is as long as you're not taking money out of these portfolios, it should grow back in time. You're rewarded. We showed that to you in a slide earlier. Okay. All right. And then we're getting down to the point where I want to make sure we cover, a few of the key points at the end here. So retirement best practices. What this slide basically says is each one of you needs to have a blueprint for how your wealth today will reach and accomplish the goals that you set for tomorrow. Okay, whatever that may be. For those of you who are in your 20s and you're trying to figure out, hey, how do I set this up? Dollar cost averaging, put money away, which account? For those of you in the net worth stage, do I buy a second property? Do I upgrade my home? Do I borrow money to do this? Whatever it may be, that blueprint has to be specific to what you need and how that's going to set you up for success. Now, expenses that you have to look at for retirement, okay? Bill, some of us will still have mortgages. We'll still have, utilities, cars, insurance, taxes. We don't know what taxes are going to look like. Will they increase? Will they be better? How much will I be owing in taxes based off of, my income levels? Dependents, will kids or parents need care? These are things that we don't talk about enough in the financial planning industry that says, hey, look at, I have many clients right now who are, either taking care of their parents or having to figure out how to take care of their parents, as well as still providing for kids. There's a lot of kids who, especially if you look at the age brackets of those folks, young adults who graduated college in the 2009 to 2012, 2013 area, there weren't a lot of jobs. There wasn't a lot of opportunity. So we see a lot of folks in their mid to late 20s, even early 30s, that are still living at home, especially after COVID, when it made sense. So those are things that you might not have planned for, but you better have at least had some type of caveat that said, hey, what happens if? And then what are your hobbies? I've got folks that, love to travel. They have different cars, antique cars, new cars, different interests that are important to you. And what is that going to cost you? And, is it really important enough for you to spend your expenses on in retirement? And then the biggest one is healthcare. We talked about healthcare. The inflation on healthcare was averaging 6.5% over the last 5 years. Where inflation was hovering in the 2.5% range, healthcare was going up triple that. So that's a big factor that we have to take into consideration. How are we going to cover those costs? Income and retirement, I'm not going to spend a lot of time in here, but basically for each of you, where is my income going to come from? And how am I going to get taxed on that? How is it going to make sure I have enough in terms of covering my bills, making sure that I can also have the fun stuff I want, right? And what are those different sources, and how do you extract that? What's the best way to do it? So those are things that we can help kind of organize for you. Pay attention to order. So typically, depending on when you retire, it could be your pension income comes in first. You may have Social Security first. Then you might be taking money from your retirement accounts. You might have, dividends. You might have savings that are growing interest. You need to make sure that you understand what is the best way for me to take my money out and keep more for me. Okay. I love the United States. I love, this country, but I'd rather have you have that money to be able to spend it on things that are good for you and your family. That will help the economy, then give it to the government through taxes, and we know that they might not make the best choices at times on how they spend that. So let's keep it in your hands and look at ways of making sure that you can spend it throughout this time frame. Withdrawal rate. So once you get to retirement, how much can I afford to take out of my account? In a previous slide, I talked about how much money you would have with the sequence of returns after 10 years. That was a 5% withdrawal rate. Well, the standard within the industry now says that you probably should only take about a 3% withdrawal. And that's based off of conservative investments. We're talking about bonds, typically pay a 3% dividend. So in order for you to at least recover what you're spending, 3% is all you're going to get from conservative investments. Even that is going down. So we have to kind of factor in what that looks like. But what is going to be okay for you based off of what you need and what you have to have. So if that withdrawal rate is higher, you may have to take a little bit more risk within your portfolio to be able to recover those expenses that are leaving. This is part of that planning process that we can put together for you. All right. So we're winding down here. I love this slide. It just talks about just a normal day at the nation's most important financial institution. So you see the cartoon, it says, I've got a stock here that could really excel. The next guy says, really excel, excel. Third guy, fourth guy, sell, everybody's selling. So, and then you look at the next one, right? Sell, this is madness. I can't take it anymore. Goodbye, bye, and everybody's buying again. Where are you getting your information to make the financial decisions for yourself? Okay, who are you listening to? What advice is really relevant to you and your situation? The people who are telling you about financial advice, we hear it from coworkers, we hear it from friends, we hear it from family, we hear it from the news. They don't know you. They don't know your situation, what's going to be the most relevant. Are they taking in all of the factors that matter? And then who can you trust within this process? The credit union has been a trusted resource for many of you throughout your lives. They've brought me in over 7 years ago to help in this process to make sure that I'm a valuable resource to you. I give financial advice, but I'm a financial planner. Okay. What's the difference between advice and planning? Planning looks at all aspects of your life. It looks at, are you protected with a living trust? In the state of California, it's pretty mandatory if you have a property. Do you have enough insurance to protect your assets? Where are you invested? What are the things that you need those investments to do for you? The planning process goes in and takes into consideration everything. I said at the beginning of the presentation that somebody asked me, hey, I have a CD maturing. What do I do with it? I can't really tell you what to do with it because I don't know enough about you to give you good advice to make a good decision. So there's a process that we go through. Part of that process, we use a financial planning software, Money Guide Pro. This helps us to organize all of the information. What it does is we say, here are the goals that you have. When I want to retire, how much money I'm going to need, what's my budget going to look like for retirement? What are my goals? What are the fun things I want to do? Can I afford those, right? I might have obligations, college, whatever it may be. I want to buy a new home, a vacation home, or a retirement home. I want to move out of state. We put all of that into our tools, and then we say, what monies, what funds do you have to cover those costs? And it will compute a score. This is a process that we offer for members of the credit union for free. We do not charge. We talk about free consultations all the time. I do a lot of presentations within different law enforcement organizations, and we actually don't have a lot of people taking us up on this. I recommend it to everybody. Okay, you go to many different financial institutions, they'll charge you $2,500 to get this accomplished. We don't charge for this. So this is something that, I recommend you take advantage of. Lastly, for those of you who are in drop or looking to do drop or have questions about drop, I'm extremely familiar with the process with pensions, what to do, how to do it, all of the paperwork. I have copies of it. I've worked with pensions. I've worked with a deferred comp with the city of LA. I've worked with Horizons. I've worked with CalPERS. Whatever investment you have, we have information that can be valuable to you and what you should do. And again, it's just a resource to have somebody who you can trust to be able to talk through that. All right, I hammered through that in 55 minutes. We have a few questions or a few minutes left to be able to answer questions. I want to be respectful of time. And then I'm going to leave up here my contact information. If you have questions, you can email me or call me, and we can set up a consultation for you. Again, one of the questions we had, what's the cost, right? If you're a member of the credit union, the cost is free, okay? Now, I will be very transparent. Whenever you hear there's a free consultation, make sure you recognize that you are the product, okay? I would love to work with you. I would love to manage your investments. I would love to do investments because that's how I get paid. I'm not on payroll with the credit union. I get paid through commissions. I get paid through advisory services. So I'm hoping that we can become partners and I can work with you long term, but there is no obligation. And if you use the service and we don't work together, you're never going to hear back from me. I won't hound you and keep going up, calling you up. All right, let's see what else we got. All right, any member can reach out to me, consult me, make sure that you have your preferred branch. We will meet you at the branch that you want to make the appointment at. We can do it virtually. We can just do a phone interview as well to make sure that you have the information necessary. Typically send you an email. I have an assistant. Her name is Vanessa. She might be the one that could organize that information for you to make sure that you get on my calendar. There was one other question about inflation that came through. So what I want you to think about is you're hearing a lot of different information on inflation, and I tried to give you, the bare bones as quickly as possible. But make sure that you understand how it impacts you, right? Hopefully, we see those inflation numbers drop down, and everything starts to move into a point where the Federal Reserve has shocked the system enough. The stock market has already accounted for many of these things. You've heard statements like it's baked in or it's cooked in. It is it's already factored into the current market conditions, baked in. What that means is people have already sold off because they think something is going to happen in the future. Well, if that doesn't happen, the market rises. If it does happen, it might drop a little bit, but it was already baked in. So it's already accounted for many of those things. So there's a lot of different ways to look at the market. And we have a lot of people who ask questions about, self-directed plans. You may have a financial advisor who's already working with your portfolio. I'm happy to give you a second opinion. If that person is doing a good job, I'll tell you that. If I think that there's something out there you should be looking at, I'll tell you to go back and have that conversation with that financial advisor, because that's something that you need to address with them. And if you like that person, stick with them. That's great. It's awesome that you're out there trying to get more information and educate yourself, and that's what's important to me. And I think that's all right. And then one other thing, there are many people on here who are with Voya with deferred comp. I like Voya. I'm not the biggest fan of Voya in terms of their execution, their I want to call it service, really. They're very nice. They have good customer service, is what they say. No, they're just nice. The service aspect sometimes lacks. We did a rollover recently. They didn't, send it out to the financial institution, put it in the client's name, like just issues. Many of you may have gotten a letter earlier. So there's issues with Voya, but that 457 plan has very important tax advantages. If you're getting close to retirement and you're still in your 50s, you want to continue to work with Voya because you can take money out of that before the age of 59 and a half and not incur a tax penalty. And that works for any 457 plan. So if you're in a 457, you're going to retire before the age of 59 and a half, call me, I'll give you that tax information. So that's my caveat on Voya. Thank you all for attending tonight. We greatly appreciate it. Hopefully this is of value. If you have any feedback, love to hear it. That's the only way we're going to make this better for you as members.
Thank you so much, Chris. Folks, we'll be sending the recording out very soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.